You have arrived at the K.O.E. Nation.
I am your King of Extreme, Phil, K.O.E., the man of the hour, the man with the power, the man that makes you the podcast cower. You can, of course, find me right here at Big Buckin' Empire on YouTube and Facebook, Hazard Analysis on YouTube, and, of course, K.O.E. Nation on YouTube, TikTok, Twitch, and Twitter. And I am joined this evening by my indomitable broadcast partner, the one, the only,
the 5, 10, 15-time Revolutionary Wrestling Podcast Champion, the non-Kappa friendly, the quadruple distilled, the non-chill filtered, Tony fucking G. Find me on TikTok /Tony the Rod, at Tony the Rod on the TikTok. Yep, that's pretty much that. And we're starting out this pre-recorded, God forbid, holy shit, yep, just throw the babies in the air, cancel your credit cards, default on your mortgage, and just cry yourself to sleep recorded episode of...
I don't know if you should do all those things.
No, just do, because apparently that's the only thing you can do when we are not live, is just cry about it and cry more.
I mean, I get it. Your life is tumult and chaos without live interaction with us, but
here we are anyway for the Dog and Chicken Show, and we are literally here, Phil and Tony G, residents of Nebraska, at the Chicken Coop, which resides in South Dakota. Yep. And do you see fucking chicken of the chicken coop? No, he's outside being a cunt.
Tony, you and I are denizens of the great state of Nebraska.
Yes.
And also, I want to tie this in as a twofer. You also are the head of the GRIP Paranormal Investigation Group. Is this correct?
I am, yes.
Yes. Now, I don't know how things are ranked in that particular world, but you seem to be the main driving force of GRIP Paranormal.
Yes, that's fair.
Now, as you know, as residents of Nebraska, I have been trying to get us on a hunt for the fabled Salt Witch of Nebraska.
Right.
So, if I may, I want to read real quick here just the very short account. It's literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs. It's 6 paragraphs.
And as you bring it up, I not just a week ago did a 5-minute guest spot on a podcast called Meet the Elite Podcast. You can catch my 5-minute little episode on, I believe, Spotify. It's never really heard of it, never knew of it, but they contacted me and said, hey, come do a little spot on our show, Meet the Elite Podcast. Check it out on Spotify. Tony G.
Will do.
I think it's on there now.
Moving on up in the world, T. Oh, whoopsie daisies.
Then there's that.
Moving on up in the world, T. So, the reason I bring this up is because I would really like to get into that sometime because it fascinates me.
Right.
Not even because I particularly think we're going to find anything, but just because this is such an interesting piece of Native American lore that it needs to be documented and to a much greater extent. Because this, what I'm about to read to you folks, is the only documentation.
I want to specify that, that there's the distinct difference right out of the gate is we're not talking about, holy shit, my house is terrifying me. This is Native American lore.
Yes.
There's a distinct difference.
Well, let me get into this.
All right.
The Salt Witch of the Nebraska Plains by Charles N. Skinner. In 1896, a pillar of snowy salt once stood on the Nebraska Plain, about 40 miles above the point where the Saline River flows into the Platte River, and white men used to hear of it as the Salt Witch. An Indian native tribe, was for a long time quartered at the junction of the river. It's a chief, a man of blood and muscle in whom his people gloried, but so fierce withal that nobody made a companion of him except his wife, who alone could check his tigress rage. In truth, he loved her so well that on her death he became a recluse and shut himself within a lodge, refusing to see anybody. This mood endured with him so long that mutterings were heard in the tribe, and there was talk of choosing another chief. Some of this talk he must have heard, for one morning he emerged in war dress, and without a word to anyone strode across the plains to the westward. On returning a full month later, he was He was more communicative and had something unusual to relate. He also provided his prowess by brandishing a belt of fresh scalps before the eyes of his warriors. He had also brought a lump of salt. He told them that after traveling far over the prairie, he had thrown himself on the earth to sleep when he was aroused by a wailing sound close by. Then, in the light of a new moon, he saw a hideous old woman brandishing a tomahawk over the head of a younger one, who was kneeling, begging for mercy, and trying to shake off the grip from her throat. The sight of the woman 40 miles from the village surprised the chief that he ran toward them. The young woman made a desperate effort to free herself, but in vain, as it seemed, for the hag wound her left hand in her hair, while the other she raised an axe and was about to strike. At that moment, the chief gained a view of the face of the younger woman. It was that of his dead wife. With a snarl of wrath, he leapt upon the hag and buried his own hatchet in her brain. But before he could catch his wife in his arms, the earth had opened and both women disappeared. But a pillar of salt stood where he had seen this thing. For years, the natives maintained that the column was under the custody of the Salt Witch, and when they went there to gather salt, they would beat the ground with their clubs, believing that each blow fell upon her person and kept her from working other evils. By Charles N. Skinner, 1896, compiled and edited by Keith Weiser, Legends of America, updated June 2021. And so what I'm trying to find is a pillar of salt once stood on the Nebraska plain about 40 miles above the point where the Saline River flows into the Platte River. Now, that point, Tony, as I've looked up now, for at least about 70 years, there hasn't been a river called the Saline River.
Okay.
I try to keep looking it up. There's different accounts. And so, luckily, my dad, actually, you pointed out on the map, okay, from everything you're describing here, and from anything I remember when I was a kid, this is probably your Saline River. And he pointed out to me the actual river that's probably the old Saline River.
Which is it?
I can't remember the name right now.
Oh.
Okay, he actually marked it out on a map, so all I gotta do is go find that map again.
Good.
So it's not a big deal. Again, we're having fun here in the evening, but so my question to you is this something that interests you, and why or why not? Both answers equally fascinate me.
When you're talking about history, that's essentially that's the column of paranormal investigation, because anytime you want to talk about something that's strange, unexplainable, you have to first delve into the history of it, because if you don't delve into the history of it, you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're basically just you're spooking yourself in a dark room. And by that, I mean you're doing yourself a disservice by getting yourself hyped up and scaring yourself for no other reason than the thrill of it. That's why you go see a scary movie. You watch a scary movie on Netflix. If you actually want to learn something and experience something, then you have to first delve into the history of it. You have to understand the lore of it. So in an instance like this, when you're talking about history, and let's be frank, a lot of folklore, which is what this is, because you can't specifically point to it on a map and find it specifically by getting directions. You have to make assumptions. You have to follow the lore. You have to search for it, in essence. So it's a different aspect of the field, but it's still interesting nonetheless. So there's a lot of folklore, regardless of what state you reside in. Like Nebraska has a lot, and a lot of it's bullshit. Now, something like this, as detailed as this, is a lot more intriguing than, say, just off the top of my head, for a ridiculous example, East 3rd Street in York, Nebraska. At midnight, people throw rocks at you. That was one of the most haunted things in the state, according to a website, for many, 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 many years.
Certainly couldn't just be some kids throwing rocks.
Right, yeah, no, Phil. Absolutely.
Couldn't just be a couple
insulting.
of kids fucking with you.
No,
it's got to be something paranormal.
Yeah, no, it's obviously demons. Demons.
Oh, okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, don't be a dick.
Thank you for clarifying. I was afraid. Now,
So
like
yeah,
this,
no, but
this
to
is
me, yeah, this is when we talk about my first.
Yeah, I want to know, what's your first instinct when you hear this?
My first instinct is we're talking about history, and history itself gets embellished.
Okay.
And that's my immediate reaction when we're talking about anything regarding whether it's paranormal, folklore, spooky in any regard. I am immediately very, 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 very skeptical, and especially when it comes not to just history, but when the history delves specifically into folklore. Folklore, highly entertaining, highly interesting, and I like to find out where exactly the folklore started and why it went that way. I think it's highly interesting. Before I was a fan of creepypasta, I liked folklore tales.
Yeah, like, to me, like, again, you know me, in all these things, I'm highly skeptical. Okay?
As
I've
you
always
should be.
been...
That's how you should interest these.
Like, but, like, you've known me throughout my life,
Right.
and my different, arcs that,
Yes.
like, I lived a very secular life where I didn't believe in anything that was unseen, and I was
Understood.
very skeptical of this. Now, even, like, I attend church, and, like, I'm with very nice Christian people. They also don't believe in ghosts staying on this plane. Okay, so in any
They
iteration
believe in
of
angels.
but they aren't ghosts that interfere in this plane. So we can get into scripture
We're
here a little later.
splitting hairs at this point, which is why it bothers me when people are just so determined to say, "No, I believe in this," but ghosts? No, it's crazy talk. But yeah, no, angels, absolutely helps me play baseball.
That's not exactly what
Maybe
some
not.
people would classify
But
their
it's
beliefs.
probably closer
But
than you want to admit in some cases.
in some cases, sure, because there's a lot of people that just go to church and just pray for things. I want
I've
things, and I
literally-
want this bad thing to happen, this thing, and this good thing to
I
happen.
literally
to that person.
know
that happens all
people
the
who
time.
have said the words, "I don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe in angels."
Yeah,
At that
okay.
point, you're splitting hairs because you're still talking about an afterlife, but you're arguing the point of heaven versus.
Well, no. What I'm saying is Christian theology teaches that your soul does not linger in this plane past death.
Oh, because the Pope canceled purgatory.
Well, no, that's also a Protestant belief as well.
But we're
so-
still arguing heaven versus purgatory.
Well, no, we're
From a common core concept.
arguing passing on versus staying here. And
Which is heaven versus purgatory.
Well, no, unless you're saying Earth is purgatory, because if you're
the
saying
soul
a ghost
lingers on Earth, is that not purgatory? Concept alone.
I could see where you're coming at with that, but
Then
like
what's-
I'm just saying
if
that
that's not purgatory,
I'm just
what is
saying that's
purgatory?
not consistent with Christian theology as I understand it.
If we understand it from the Christian theology, we're talking heaven versus hell. Heaven is paradise.
Yeah.
The
Now,
kingdom.
actually, like
Hell is damnation. In between would literally be you are stuck in the soulless realm of where you cannot remain in the physical manner. Purgatory, you are on the physical plane, but not a physical being yourself. That is, as my understanding, purgatory.
okay. Now, all right.
Before the Catholics canceled it.
I was about to say, I was raised Catholic, where purgatory was a very real thing when I was a kid, okay? And literally, when they said maybe not, I know people that, this was devastating, because purgatory is as real to me as anything else, was the exact quote that they would say. But, as purgatory as I understood it, was kind of like a blank third realm that was
It's waiting
not
on a park
part of-
bench.
Yeah, like when Beetlejuice was waiting in that
Yes,
that room in the
I understand the Hollywood rendition
yeah,
of
that's
it, yeah.
that's kind of like, well, not the Tony. That's literally how tens of thousands of young Catholic children were instructed throughout the '90s. Okay,
My
that's-
understanding of the teachings and writings of purgatory is you are unfortunately sitting in limbo, literally watching
Waiting for the end of
watching the
times.
living embodiment of life, unable to interact with it as you were before death, before you can either ascend or descend. That is my understanding. That is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the interpretation of many religion.
Well, purgatory is a specifically Catholic invention that, basically was it solved a mechanical problem. Because I was thinking about this the other day in the tractor. Strange enough, purgatory specifically.
Okay.
And it solved a very big mechanical issue for Catholics in that what do we do about unbaptized babies and people who were good Christians, but
Because we can't send babies to hell.
But yes, or like people who were good Christians but maybe didn't adhere to every single Catholic doctrine or dogma, and didn't adhere to all the rituals strictly. What can we mechanically in our minds do about that?
Well, we're not going to torture them.
No,
But we can't send them to hell.
But all right, we're getting a little off here because like what I'm talking about is like why I have my skepticisms.
Right.
But like going into this or any other hunt, like I'm not expecting to find anything for my own very defined reasons.
The likelihood of finding a ghost and the likelihood of finding an angel is literally the same percentage. It's almost zero. Because that's not something that you're going to experience. Because, I'm sorry, it's just... The cold hard truth, the Hollywoodization of the paranormal field, and this started many, many, many years ago when the Sci-Fi Channel and the Travel Channel started picking up paranormal investigative shows, and they started dramatizing it.
Oh, yeah.
TAPS, the Atlantic Paranormal Society, out of
Northeastern.
No, it started out actually fantastic. They did start out great because they had a great crew. They had an honest crew. It was scientifically based, and they're like, no, this is how we go about it. Like, we're going in very skeptical. And then it got very, very dramatized. And they're like, but they still tried to pretend it was very scientifically based. And instead, and the Hollywoodization came in, took over. Things got bad. People had to leave the show because it got too kooky. And then people like Zach Baggins, you fucking pile of shit, piece of fuck you. I will fucking.
All right, so
no, fuck you, Zach Baggins. Fuck you. Literally.
Fair enough. That's fair. Now,
Ghost Adventures is the biggest crock of shit because that's what happened when Hollywood started dramatizing things. Because when ghost stories stopped being folklore and started being mainstream television, that's when everybody decided, I can do this. I'm not saying, oh, I got in on that before things were mainstream. I'm not going to pretend that. But I did my research. I tried to understand the field. I tried to go, how do people go about doing this before I go out and run around in the graveyard with a flashlight? Because that's embarrassing. But that's what people do because they don't understand the problem here. The problem here is if you want to investigate the paranormal, there's a ton of history into it. You have to get permission first and fucking foremost before you go out and do something stupid. And then go into it with an approach that's not, I'm going to find a ghost. Because if you go into a place that's dark and spooky thinking, I'm going to find a ghost, guess what? You're going to spook yourself into thinking, I just found a ghost.
Yep.
You have to have critical thinking and logical explanations running through your mind. And if you do not, your wildest imaginations are going to take over your understanding. And that's just how it is. 99% of the things that I have seen, which are, I will be honest, several things I have experienced personally have been pretty damn incredible. But they are explainable if you think about it.
We'll get there eventually. What's the one I'm looking for? There we go.
The one.
Hey, you know,
that's the one.
The last one you look for.
Always is.
Because, like, I've got 3 questions that I will eventually want to get to. But I'm kind of interested, like, at this point of, like, the skepticism and how people kind of go about it the wrong way.
Right.
And so the way that I'm going to open this is I want to gauge, like, these 3 different ideas. They're all kind of in the same vein. But I would want to gauge somebody like you, like, A, what would your level of personal interest be in pursuing each of these?
Okay.
And then if, like, say you had somebody that was willing to just be a patron for it. And, like, says, Tony G, I want you to go on this hunt and do everything you can within your power. I will fully fund it. Okay? Like, how would you go about preparing for it?
No, I understand your approach to the question. So,
and
yeah,
so
just
we're
hit
gonna,
me with it.
The first one will be, obviously, the local salt witch. Okay? What would your level of interest be there? And then if some patron said, Tony, I'm just paying for it, get it done. How would you go about preparing for that?
Okay, so when you specifically talk about something this I don't want to say hard in the pain or extreme, but you are legitimately strictly talking about something that is strictly folklore. You cannot find it on a map. It is 100%, let's be frank, hearsay. It's not something that is provable by measure. It's not something that's in a history book. It's something that is passed down generation, generation, generation. And to me, frankly, honestly, it's more interesting because it's the interpretation over the decades, over the centuries. And I find that very, very fascinating. And that's a lot of the local legends and the local hunts that I've found to be very interesting. And I've always gone into those, if I get a chance to investigate those, as this is probably bullshit, but I've read so much about it. I've been interested by this for so many years. I want to see it for myself, even though I know this is not going to be something that's going to change my life. It's not going to expand my mind. When you're talking about folklore specifically is just so, to me, interesting because you have to put your mind in the frame of when this was created. And if you're talking about something that stemmed from like the 1800s, you have to put yourself in that mind frame and think, when this folklore, when this local legend, when this story came about itself, what was the mind frame? What frame of mind was this person in when they started telling the story? How did people think in that day and age when this story started circulating? And to me, that's more interesting than anything because you have to accompany everything around you. You have to think about the times. It's time, it's space, it's everything. That let that local legend, that lore, build and build and build. And that to me is more fascinating than even history alone because it's the tall tale getting taller and taller and taller over the years.
To me, that's like it's like cultural art. I don't know how else to describe it. Like the Salt Witch is a great example of Midwestern native cultural art, for lack of better terms. And so that's what's fascinating about it to me. Now, Tony, we're going to shift gears from our region. So, okay, I'm curious what your level of interest would be in this. And then let's say your patron is like, I don't care, you get all the stuff you have to, and you bag me one of these things. And so, like, this guy's a real TB, a real true believer. Okay? Like, and
TB stands for tuberculosis.
Oh, yeah.
In the paranormal field. Sorry, it just does.
I thought that was the medical field.
Nope, tuberculosis.
Oh, okay. So, he's a true believer, okay? He truly believes this thing is out here. And he's willing to patron you for it and, like, go the whole 9 yards. And he wants you to investigate the Wendigo.
Okay, so the Wendigo, you're talking specifically this is not local folklore, this is not local legend.
This is kind of like the Rust Belt, Great Lakes area.
Okay, so yeah.
For lack of.
Sure, okay, so yeah, you're talking northern, eastern local legend, but this isn't that's not local folklore. You're mostly talking cryptozoology at this point because this isn't oh my gosh, there's a ghost, there's a specter, there's a spirit, there's an angel, there's a demon. This is an unknown.
That's why we're bringing the paranormal investigator in.
This is an unknown entity that is a living, breathing organism. That's the difference between a ghost or a demon or a specter versus a being, a beast, a crazy, unknown, living, breathing animal. Cryptozoology is it's in the same realm, but it's not even remotely distinguishable from something that, when we think about it, we're thinking about cryptozoology. Let's compare it to, ideally, let's say Bigfoot versus a ghost. Let's say the Loch Ness Monster versus a specter. It's not comparable because we're talking about potentially one thing that lived at one point and died, and now it's the soul that lingers on the astral plane, on the purgatory plane, versus something that we've never cataloged on a organism base, because it's highly different. And when we're talking about something like, say, as old as time as the Loch Ness Monster versus something as more modern, let's be frank, as the Wendigo, which is a lot more reasonable because we can really imagine that. And that's what it is. When you're talking about something like the Loch Ness Monster, that's something that's been passed on from eon and eon and generation, decade to decade, specific to one location, whereas like the Wendigo is more... You can picture this in your head and be much, much more frightened of it, which actually helps to add to the
legend.
Internal legend folklore. It's not local folklore specifically. It's more internal because it's all about the idea and the presence and the possibility of something like this existing. And you can create this in your own mind, and that's what makes it spooky and scary in one's own perception, because when you think about it, you're like, everything this being and this organism does is completely logical. This exists on a plane that we understand. This is completely realistic to think. We don't understand all the beings that exist in the world. Look at the ocean floor. When you investigate the deepest portions of the ocean, you think, we don't understand all the creatures that live on the bottom of the ocean, and we couldn't possibly, because we can't chart those. We can't understand the crazy conceptions that are on the bottom of the ocean. Like, when we discover new life on the bottom of the ocean, it's mind-blowing to us, because how does this creature exist? And that's why when you look at something that exists on grass, on soil, on dirt, within our region of the United States, of the continent that we live on, that's what makes it scary. Because when we're talking about the ocean, it's like uncharted waters, depths that we'll never personally experience unless we are oceanographers. But when we're talking about just, my God, if we go out into the woods, we could experience a man-eating being that's never been recorded on film, picture, or any geographical book. That's what makes the concept terrifying to the human mind. Because, let's be frank, do you think, right now, the people that are listening to me, watching this right now, do you honestly think we have visibly, understandably charted all living organisms that live above the surface? And if you say yes, you're just wrong. That's not a concept that's realistic.
I was about to say, there's an account in, I believe, is either the First or Second World War, where there was these folks in the military that were flying very low, and they saw this massive snake in Africa, which is like supposed to be like snakes should not get this big, extinct species, basically.
Sure.
And they like fly low to see, and they multiple like very honorable folks in the military who retired with honors. Multiple eyewitnesses said this giant snake actually snapped at their plane. It was so large. And so we have, like, there's areas of the Congo that have not been explored. There's areas of Africa that no human foot has ever stepped foot. There's areas, believe it or not, despite how densely populated it is, China, that there's areas that we haven't actually explored.
None that are charted that we can actually confirm that we've stepped foot on as a species of man.
Yeah, within our
understanding.
To be frank, let's put it at about 50,000 years. What I would call, like, I know evolutionarily speaking, it goes back further, but I call modern man about 50,000 years ago to today.
Fair.
And our modern footsteps have never stepped foot in most of these places. So there's definitely more species that we don't know of and can't account of. So, like, that's one. So, what would your level of interest be for something like that?
So, when we're talking strictly cryptozoology, it's.
He's like, is that, I don't know, is that not exactly your specialty, but it's something that if you had to, you could dabble?
So,
is that a fair characterization? Or?
Yeah, it's a fair characterization, but like, to be frank, just to give complete clarification, when I was a young child, let's say like 5, 6, 7, 8, that age range, you remember when the local library in town, in our small town, expanded from the small portion that it was into the large building that it is now. Do you remember that expansion process?
Yes.
Okay, so when that happened specifically, I remember very, very, very vividly, before that process and expansion happened, there was a section on the left side when you walk straight in. There was the desk where the librarian sat, and on the left, on the very end bookcase, you could find, not science fiction, but it was an entire section of crypto, ghosts, aliens, and all the sort. And I would go there. That's where I would go. And there was an entire section of books. They weren't very thick. They weren't.
I remember them well.
They weren't very in depth, but it had visuals and it had the text at the time, as to the age range I was, it was very appealing.
I actually took my daughter to that public library, and we looked at those same books a few years ago.
I believe they were orange on the cover, black and white pictures, very simple text, and it gave a very introductory understanding of these things. It always fascinated me. So these concepts always fascinate me. So when we're talking about cryptozoology, yeah, it's in the same realm, but if you're talking about me as somebody who's been investigating the paranormal since 2011, and I've never once gone on a specific crypto case, it's like, example, the only one that you can truly give that would be realistic would be somebody who like hunts Bigfoot. That's what they do. That's the best example of crypto I can give. It's a very, very different thing, because you do 100% expect to come back with physical evidence. When you're investigating the paranormal, you do not, and you should not, expect to come back with physical evidence, because we're not talking about physical realm. With crypto, yes, you are talking, the goal is specifically physical, visible, organismal proof of an entity that exists on the real plane of something that we have never charted before. So it's highly interesting, highly sought after, and it's very interesting. It's not something I've personally embarked on myself, but yeah. When you're blending those two things, like you're talking about here, we're talking about a witch versus crypto, and could it exist on the same plane? Absolutely, because there's no given understanding of that. But when we're talking about a ghost versus like the Loch Ness Monster, it's not even remotely the same thing. It's just not.
Okay. Now, that kind of answers what was going to be the third question, but now I've altered it, because the third question was, and it sounds like it's going to be more or less the same, what would you do in preparation for an investigation of the Skinwalker?
Okay.
In the American Southwest, but like I'll get an abbreviated answer on that, and then we'll. All right, so Tony, the Skinwalker. So
I have my basic concept understanding of the Skinwalker, but let's be frank, this is more of an SCP creepypasta type concept. It's not. This is more modern writing than it is local folklore. No.
The Skinwalker is very old Southwest native. You have to break a very big taboo in order to become, which is why this is more like witchcraft, voodoo, getting into the realm of like. Now, I don't think those Skinwalkers are real. I'm
going to be frank.
But this is a story.
That's the modern interpretation of it, though, because there is local folklore there.
You have to skin an animal to turn into it.
It is local folklore. There's an aspect of that, but there's a lot of modern interpretation that goes along with it. And the thing I liked about local folklore, that like when the internet, I'll be frank, one of the biggest things that drew me into the internet. I was not, when I was a kid, scary movies scared the hell out of me. I didn't love them. I didn't like them at all. They spooked the fuck out of me. Like Chucky, when I would go into the bathroom, I would kick the goddamn shower curtain open because that thing freaked me the fuck out. I was not a scary movie kid. But for whatever reason, eventually one thing just clicked, and I liked the concept of like Michael Myers and ghosts and aliens, and eventually when I liked aliens and Bigfoot and Nessie, I didn't like the idea of like Michael Myers and Chucky, and then eventually the things intertwined, and I think it was the interpretation of the internet, because the early stage of the internet, for whatever reason, I stumbled across an early stage website of very, very, very localized folklore, and that's why I bring that word up so often. It was just local folklore of stories from very, very early on, pilgrimage, witch hunt, that era. And I found them so fascinating. Some were extraordinary, ridiculous, and some are just like, that's so detailed, it's believable. And it was this is the early stage of the internet where my 13-year-old mind didn't know how to comprehend the difference anyway. And that always stuck with me. So when we're talking about something as specific as a Skinwalker, there's a ton of modern flair on it, but a ton of local folklore plus lore and legend. Neither specific to region, but also kind of specific to region. So please give me your specific
one thing
interpretation.
to kind of spin off of that, like talking about going back to the Wendigo a little bit.
Right.
The horns is a very modern thing that only came in vogue, like literally I think in the 70s.
Okay.
When like some fictional interpretations showed a Wendigo with horns just because it was more dramatic. Mm-hmm. Now, normally it's somebody that's very gaunt, their eyes are sunken, and it's a metaphor for not turning to cannibalism in very, very bad climates where there's a lot of cold. And to me, it's kind of the psychological tale of, if you do this, if you commit this sin, if you commit this taboo, you will become the Wendigo.
But when you say specifically Wendigo, we're still, this is where the gray area begins, because you are still talking about an organismal being versus something
in
that's
this
not.
moment, I'm talking
because
about
the Wendigo kind of
a
transcends
cultural
both.
idea, like kind of like almost like an evil Santa Claus.
You've kind of got to explain what the Wendigo, because it's specific.
For those who don't know, the Wendigo is a native spirit in the sort of Great Lakes region, which to me always served as a cautionary tale for people that even if times turn truly bad, do not turn to cannibalism, because it will corrupt your spirit. It will corrupt your soul. It will, in a way, turn you into a Wendigo. And there actually
was it a deterrent for people to just not be the most animalistic interpretation of themselves?
It was very much a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
And it was also like, the boogeyman, like, oh, if you children behave, otherwise the Wendigo will eat you. And and so that's how I always saw the Wendigo. Now again, that's my interpretation. Now the Skinwalker, the Skinwalker as I know it,
and the difference between the two.
The Wendigo, think of it more like a werewolf in that it doesn't have a lot of higher brain functions. It has some levels of intelligence, but not a lot. It's kind of like, it's a thing that cannot be reasoned with. Okay, like its hunger is insatiable.
Right.
According to the legends, the Skinwalker, even though it is in these animal forms, maintains its human intelligence the entire time, which makes it a fascinating thing to, that's not a bad one, which makes it a fascinating thing to consider. Now, again, this is all just, like you said, folklore, but like from everything I've ever heard, everything I've ever read, and old family tales, which I have some family from the American Southwest. I have some native ancestry from my grandmother's side. She was half Greek, half Hispanic native. It's complicated.
Sure. Yeah.
But
paganistic stuff is it's funny how
good way of
pagan, not rituals, but retellings of stories carry over to different, not just religions, but folklore, but dressed up as not religion, but kind of religion.
Yeah, that's now like one of the things that, it's kind of, it takes on a pseudo-religious quality. But one thing I was always told about the Skinwalker is that it's somebody that has committed one of the most heinous taboos against one of their own family.
And
which
the
is
Skinwalker's still something that lives amongst the living. It's not dead. It's not a ghost.
It's allegedly a human that gained a tremendous amount of power through committing the awful taboo of either murdering or graping one of their own family members. But
now cursed with their existence, a horrible existence with that power.
That kind of depends on which tribal, like some will say like it's just purely like the villain of the story,
right.
And for some like there's this weird
arc it's the point of ascension you could not possibly imagine to attain.
I wouldn't quite go that far, but
maybe not as
it's
tremendous.
Always the Skinwalker's always a heel, okay?
Right,
in all theology is always a heel.
That's what I'm getting at. It's a bad guy.
But like in order to change into whatever animal it wants to, it has to first capture and then skin it ritualistically, which is why no Skinwalkers ever change into like a bear or
Right.
like something like that, because that's a little difficult to change into.
So, okay, in terms of specifically the
Coyotes, on the
skinwalker.
other hand, most skinwalkers are known, like the animal that they're most associated with is the coyote.
Okay, so we're still talking about something within the realm of it's highly susceptible to something on the food chain that is well respected in terms. Jesus, the bear, which is very high in the food chain. Let's be frank, the human being, unless it has the proper tools, is going to get absolutely manhandled by the bear.
Or barehanded.
So we're still, even in cryptozoology, talking about something that is highly susceptible to even a human being. Let's be frank, because when it comes to cryptozoology and when it comes to the food chain of the understood human ladder, where we rank, a human being versus a bear, for an example, stands absolutely no chance whatsoever unless
it's Phil K.O.E.
I was going to switch cameras, but no. No, the understanding is no, the human being in a physical altercation stands no chance versus the bear. But from an IQ standpoint, if the human being has access to the proper tools and environment...
Basically, if he's got Batman prep time.
Oh, yeah, no, Batman prep time, that's completely different. That's not even close.
But
so
like,
it's
understand,
about the IQ.
I understand some of your trepidation. You're just like, so Phil, what you're telling me here is the skinwalker here has less magical power than a brown bear.
That's pretty much what you kind of said. Because you just said to get its shit rocked by a bear, but it's better than a human. Mm-hmm. So there you go.
I was like, that might be nice. Whatever taboo you did, but it gave you less magical power than something about 290 pounds.
So then versus, say
bear.
then the Wendigo versus the Skinwalker.
Ooh, that one's tough because, like, okay, now this is purely just fantasy, like
fantasy,
Royal Rumble.
Fantasy booking, we're total skeptics.
Okay, the Skinwalker has the intelligence factor, but Wendigo is just so overwhelming. And also, to the native legends, the more they would eat, the larger they would grow, because that way they would never be satisfied. They would never be satiated.
So the mass does take an interpretation here, where eventually it could be much more mass-based than a bear.
Oh yeah, much larger.
Okay.
And like, and one of it was. I'll have to send it to you. It's a great creepypasta that talked about, like, it was this Black Ops military force that goes out and hunts Wendigos and stuff, and like, on their comms, like, warning, Algonquin, which was their code word for Wendigo. And they talked about these things that are 14 feet tall and they're just coming at them. And so, fascinating. I'll send the story to you. It was very well written. But like, so that's the idea, is it will get bigger and bigger and bigger because it can never be insatiated. It will always, like, it's always eating, not just because it's hungry, but because it cannot feel warmth.
So it's not a comparable crypto, but it's on the same realm of existence if you want to commit to believing in the crypto, in the creepypasta trends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, well, to me, it's like, one's the tale of the American desert, one's the tale of the Great Lakes and the northern cold lands.
So region does play into this.
Yes, very much.
I get that, but one is very limited, where the other's power and intimidation factor is a lot more expanded. So, again, I want to go back to this. Like, it's for me personally, it's very specific. It's very awkward. Like, like, when people ask me, like, what brought you to being like, why do you want to, like, hunt ghosts? What the fuck? Why would you want to do this? Again, it was the basic concept of a handful of books that I found in the library that I found very, very, very fascinating. The concept of what's above, out there, in the realm of space that we can't possibly chart or imagine. What exists on an astral plane already on this earth that we can't possibly imagine in another dimension? What cryptoids are there out there that we have not charted? Like, those are the things that fascinate me, because we go about our daily business and our daily lives going, there are things that are absolutely absurd, that we think that's ridiculous. Yet at one time, most things were ridiculous until they weren't. And that's kind of always been my driving force. Like, most of the stuff I've seen, that I've experienced, the cases that I've gone on, the ghost hunts that I've experienced, it's mostly explainable. But what the fuck if I happen to be one of those people in those instances that's just super damn lucky to happen to find that one little itty-bitty piece of footage that expands the concept of what we understand as the astral plane, the celestial being, the other dimension, the ghost realm, the afterlife, if you will. And I get to not only capture that on evidence, but experience it firsthand. I'd be a fool not to want to try to be there, be the person that catches that. Again, 99% of the time, that's just not going to happen because I'm a realist. But Jesus, what the fuck if?
Now that's fascinating, because I thought your answer for the Wendigo was just going to be like a ditto, or your answer for the Skinwalker was just going to be a ditto for your Wendigo answer. But no, there was a lot more depth to that. So that was fascinating. Now, we're going to shift gears slightly, because I think this is getting back into your expertise here. This is my third question here. This is a little bit closer to our region, and something that I've wanted to do for a long time. The Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado.
Yes.
Okay, like, now, it's famous
Highly,
place. I
yes.
mean, The Shining, wasn't that where they filmed The Shining?
So,
or am I off on that?
no.
I think that's where it was.
So the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado was the concept of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, but it was not filmed in Estes Park.
Okay.
The TV movie-ish, which starred not Joe from Wings, but his brother, for the TV made-for-movie version of The Shining, was actually filmed on location at
The
Stanley Hotel. But that does not disqualify, because the Stanley Hotel has an absolute ton of history. It does. I don't think the maze scene either was filmed there, but the concept transcends. I've talked to a lot of people that have visited the Stanley. I know many people very, very close to me who have visited there, who've driven by there, who've toured there. It's a place that I've always wanted to go. And again, I bring back up Ghost Hunters on the Sci-Fi Channel, the first iteration of real paranormal investigation that I really got to watch and understand their process. They've done live investigations on TV of the Stanley more than once. And it's... I'm sorry. It's one of those things where I'm like...
Be honest.
Everybody kind of just killed it for me. It's architecturally speaking, I would love to go to this building. I've
been there one time years ago. Now, my family for years has gone to Estes Park, Colorado for vacations. Like when I was, I think the first time I went, I was maybe 7. Okay, and the last time I went with our family on a trip, I think was 16. Okay. And so it was a nice long, and it was almost every year. I think
20-ish years ago.
Yeah. But I've gone with my daughter a few times and taken her, and she loved it.
Yeah.
Took her to the same taffy shop, the same, all that stuff. My mother always refused to stay at the Stanley. But she finally, one time she had to go up there because we've actually got some family not too far off and had to do something for them. And we actually went into the Stanley to just go to the bar to get a drink. Just because I just want to see this place. I just started walking around.
Oh, yeah. That's...
Unfortunately, it's if you want to start walking too deep, you got to pay for the tour. Okay, like that was... And my mom didn't want to stick around for the tour.
Understandable, yeah.
And she hates paranormal stuff, and she didn't want to do it. Like, that's that's basically Satan, as far as she's concerned.
That's fair. Get it.
And so... But beautiful building. Oh, my God. It's like...
That's half the fun.
Like, it's what you imagine, like, Gotham City. Like, you remember the Val Kilmer Gotham City or the George Clooney Gotham City? And, like, what you would imagine the insides of the buildings to look like?
Yes,
That's what the Stanley looks like, okay?
Yes, and that's a big part of it. Like, when Chicken and I first founded Grip, it wasn't like... Okay, sure, a big part of it is... I want to find me some fucking ghosts. That sounds great. But another portion of it, the first case he and I went on, literally, this is the story. This is how this went down. We talked about this for years. Like, we should do this, we should do this, we should do this. And one day, he sends me a text message. I can't believe we haven't done this yet. And I went, yeah, I can't believe we haven't done this yet either. I get nothing in response for about 10 minutes. And then 11 minutes later, we're doing this. This is the date. This is where we're going. This is it. I went, gee, what? What? Wait, what? And triple what? And in the 10 minutes, we'd traded like 2 text messages. He had contacted the curator of a historical society in a small-ish town in Nebraska who happened to live in a plantation-style home outside of a small-ish, large-ish town, who'd lived there in their youth, who'd moved away out of state, and who moved back and lived there currently. And they're just so pleasant, and it was so perfect. It was just so perfect because it was a person who appreciated history, who wasn't shut down to the idea of the paranormal. And it was perfect. It was just so perfect. It was just the 2 of us, and it was a very intimate meeting, and we got to talk about it, and it was all the concepts that I'd understood about the paranormal up until that point before I actually got to go out and do it myself, and I got to spew that out like I was an expert, and I wasn't. It was my first fucking time ever, and Chicken's like, Jesus, you sat down and started talking like you've been doing this for years, and I'm like, I kind of feel like I have, but I've never done it. And we sat down, we did this. We sit down interview, and then we finally go out and we do the actual investigation. And it literally could not have gone more picture perfect. You know, we got black and white infrared footage and audio recordings of things that you shouldn't get your first time out. And it spoiled us. I'll be frank, it did. It did.
Now,
and I'm not talking about stuff that like, oh, we were just above our... We were punching above our weight class, but like things like, no, we kind of had an idea of like, no, this is bullshit. Don't fall for this trap. We had a pretty good understanding. But at the same time, like, we definitely found some things that were not things you should find on your first outing. And that ruined me for a long time. So I again, I've seen, I've heard, I've felt, I've understood a lot of things that were things that other people will probably never understand or be able to experience themselves. But at the same time, if you're experiencing things greater than what I might be explaining, you might not have looked hard enough for the actual explanation. Because again, I'm still a realist at heart.
Now, okay, full disclosure, I've gone with you on a ghost hunt before. And before that, I showed my mom some of your footage before I went. And, you know, my mom, she's always got a pretty good sense of humor, but she's also, like, pretty sharp with her. Like, sure. I was showing her one of your intros, and it shows basically, like, a cabinet door swinging open.
That one's 100% legitimate.
Oh, I know, but, like, my mom, she sees that and goes, oh, yeah, that's it, I'm convinced. It's the ghost.
I know.
Like, it's like, don't get me wrong, like, you're working... Like I feel like what you're doing here, it's kind of like kicking water uphill because it's so hard. But
that's one of those pieces of footage where when it happened, that was we returned to the same location I just described. It was our second outing. It's a room. It's kind of a discarded room. It's a storage room that's in the upper stairs of this house. She hadn't gone in weeks, and this cabinet door is cracked. Let's say this much. She hadn't gone up there in weeks. And this cabinet door had been cracked like that literally for weeks. She hadn't gone in this room. Chicken and I are sitting downstairs where our base camp, our table, and all of our equipment are set up. And you can check this in time with the audio recording and the video footage that we had. We asked specifically, please open a door. And in real time, with the timestamp of the CCTV footage, within... like less than a minute, that cabinet door that you just described on its own opens. It's not.
I know.
I know it sounds completely ludicrous, and even myself, like I'm looking at it to this day, and I'm like, obviously we caused a wind gust to fuck with this and make it open. We had to have done this, but again, it sat like that for weeks, and we tried to instigate a response. And that specifically for me, when we're talking about the paranormal, if you can get something to respond to you, if you can instigate something to give you back to what you want, if you ask specifically for something, knocks, taps, interaction, that's when it goes from being, I'm reaching, and that's when it starts delving into actual, I don't like using the word evidence, but it's a lot closer to evidence than people going, my God, I feel like I'm being possessed.
Yeah, that like that is kind of one of the big problems is like I've been on a hunt with you before because like it was during COVID and everybody dropped out and
Yep.
What's going on there? Okay, all right.
We're
But
still
yeah,
good.
I went with you on a hunt during COVID. Everybody dropped out. And it was one of those.
Yeah, we had a couple of people drop out, and I'm like, Phil, I'd love you to go with us one time.
And I was like, I kind of felt like I was just being a good friend. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. Like, oh boy,
I just want you to experience.
Everybody dropped out on the ghost hunt. Now, what I'm gonna say is, I understand why it happens because, because. Well done. I figured you were gonna lose a tooth over that one.
They're all fake anyway.
The temptation to play along on a ghost hunt is
easy.
obscenely high because,
Yes.
like, all right, Tony.
Yes.
I don't know. Like my grandmother years ago took me to the play of Peter Pan.
Right. Don't know why that still froze. But
Yeah, let's just keep here. But like my grandmother took me to the play of Peter Pan, and if you ever go to the physical play, which you need to sometime, there's this one beautiful moment where Tinkerbell through the whole play is just portrayed as this little light, just this little bright shining light on the on the
just
stage.
a floating orb. Yeah.
And then there's this moment where the light starts to get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. And then, I think it's Peter Pan, or maybe the narrator, comes out and says, we need you, the audience, and especially the children, to say, I believe in fairies. And that's the only thing that can say, and you, the audience, you say, I believe in fairies. I believe in fairies. And the light gets brighter. And there is such a gravitational pull to want to believe in these things, which is why it's so, like, even
that's why it works. Yeah.
Like, I found myself, like, not being mean to the one girl who was thinking, a demon was in the world. Like, it's like, in my mind, I'm thinking,
you're getting caught up in the moment.
But like I felt not like I'm not gonna be mean to her, but dude,
you're unfortunately that's 100% accurate because the people that want to go out and do this want to experience something so badly that they're going to be easily convinced, and that's again why I stress this. Understand what you're getting yourself into. Understand what you have to bring along with you, and understand the mind frame that you have to have when you go to do this. Because I've never, ever, ever, ever once, in the 50 cases I've done, over the multiple locations that I've experienced, gone in going, I'm going to find me a fucking ghost tonight. Because you just can't do that. And if you do that, guess what? You're going to find a ghost.
No,
because it's conjured up in your own mind.
I'm not going to name any names, but there's at least a couple people that I've encountered on ghost hunts with you that go into every ghost hunt convinced they're going to meet a ghost.
And you're not going to be able to change
themselves
people's
that
mind.
they have.
Right,
like,
and you're not going to be able to change people's mind on this because that, unfortunately, is just how the human mind operates. Like, and unfortunately, when you're talking about things like ghosts, the concept is the afterlife. Is it specifically religious? No, but it's going to play into that. It's just going to. So, again, it's just, I've never, and people scoff at me. People have been in the field longer than I have, or attempted to be. I say, I try not to take a religious understanding into my investigation. And they go, why not? I'm like, because you're just doing yourself a disservice at this point. Because if you take that concept in, you're doing yourself a disservice because you already have a preconceived notion. And if you take a preconceived notion into this, you're going to have a bias. Whether you think so or not, whether you understand it or not, whether you realize it or not. And the best experiences I have had personally doing paranormal investigation have not been going to famous haunted locations like the Villisca Axe Murder House or the Waverly Hills Tuberculosis Sanatorium in Kentucky. It's been doing private residences in small town rural Nebraska or wherever with people who are actually literally scared to exist in their home, who've contacted me specifically and said, I heard that you can help me. And I'm like, I'll do my best. And we've gone into their home as guests, invited, because they're scared, and gone, I don't know what's going on in my home. And here's what happened. We were able to put the pieces of the puzzle together and figure out, logically speaking, completely explainable, why they were feeling uneasy, why they felt scared in their home, and told them, look, the ground wiring in your furnace room was bad and it made you paranoid because high frequencies of this, or your AC was running at such a reverberation that, believe it or not, if it runs at a specific frequency, can make you hallucinate. These are real phenomenon that happen and are physically explainable. And when you can actually do that and tell somebody, no, you're not actually crazy, and it may not be the answer that you wanted, but you're going to be able to sleep in your house tonight without having to be completely freaked out. That's more rewarding to me than finding somebody running around on a sheet in the fucking halls of a jail.
Well, Tony, I'm going to leave it with this one last question here, because this is a central question. Because you seem to be trying to apply, when you say I'm not getting into a religious interpretation, so you seem to be trying to apply the scientific method of thesis, hypothesis, and repeatable testing to the paranormal.
Yes.
With all of your investigations and with all of that being in consideration, would it not be reasonable to come to the conclusion that this is not true?
That what's not true?
The paranormal.
Oh, no, a 1,000,000%, yes, absolutely. Because the idea and the concept of the paranormal at its core, you cannot sit here and tell me that it's not based off of local folklore, witchcraft, ghost stories, and the like. It's just going to stem from that. Because the greatest story ever told is one that the human mind cannot conceptually understand. That's why stories snowball. That's why local folklore takes on lives of their own. That's why they grow. That's why they get bigger. That's why they survive decades and decades and decades, because they're so tremendous and intriguing. From a scientific approach, like I liked the Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster books, going to the library. And as the decades and years fell off the calendar, the idea of a dinosaur in the Scotland Loch came more and more and more ridiculous, because no, this, logistically speaking, is ridiculous. But the concept of, like, aliens and not technically ghosts, but something on a different plane, that you can't necessarily disprove, just like you can't disprove something on the religious scale. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? The same concept applies. So, of course, it could be absolutely, this doesn't exist. And more times than not, I'm going, this probably doesn't exist. The claims that you're making, I'm not telling you it's bullshit, but I'm going to believe what you're saying, and I'm going to try to find the answer as to why, and I'm going to try to find the answer of how before you've concluded the why.
Interesting. Well, T, that is a very fascinating little glimpse into the world of grip. That from the past and some of your perspectives, I'm curious. Other than obviously the Salt Witch investigation,
Indeed.
other than obviously going to the Stanley, is there anything that's kind of piquing your interest that you'd like to get into? Now, I know it's like, especially in this economy and in everything in the world, it's really hard to get all, like, with grip, I've noticed a lot of clocks need to strike the same hour at the same time.
True, yes.
And
that's just any day or age, of life.
Yeah, so I'm curious, is there anything that, like, you definitely want to... Like, I want to investigate this before I'm too old that my knees
Right.
won't let me do it when I'm in my 60s or 70s.
So some of the big ones that I've wanted to do, I've done the Villisca Axe Murder House 3 times now, which is just a. I'll be frank, it's location close by in Nebraska. I'm lucky enough to be able to have done that so many times. It's an incredible place. It's very nerve ending the first time, but once you're used to it, you kind of get it. And the history is so spine chillingly terrorizing. That's a great location, even though it's not. I'll save my personal biases, whatever. But great location. The Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky, was on my bucket list to visit, regardless of what I did. I wanted to see it. I got to experience it. I got to experience the building itself and the architecture, and it's so large, and the history is so big, and the deaths over the course of tuberculosis in the thousands. It's incredible. It's ridiculous. It's terrifying. That was one of those places I always wanted to see, and I got to do that. And it didn't intimidate me because I'd done this for so long. I thought it would, and it just didn't. I was just, get me the fuck in this building so I can experience this. There's other places like the Winchester Mystery House that I believe in some region of California.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about
the
that
story is the widow that built this house she lost her mind and she started building staircases. Nowhere there was always a construction crew on site to build and build and build onto the house, because as the ghosts would follow her around room to room, if they just kept building onto the house, it would confuse the ghosts. It's apparently a very interesting location. The Lizzie Borden house in the Northeast is supposed to be very interesting. Love to see that. Lot of great places in the Southwest, as well as the Southeast. Louisiana, especially. A lot
Louisiana.
of voodoo. Yes. There's a lot of great places. There's, internationally speaking, a lot of great places as well. But you have to go into these places with a certain level of confidence. And eventually you get that. Because whether you believe in it or not, you think it's all bullshit. Once you're actually looking at it, you're there. And it's big. And it's right in front of you. And you're like, oh yeah, everything I've read about this, everything I've been told about this, everything I've watched about this, I think it's all bullshit. But now it's right in front of me. Even if I think it's only like a 0.005 chance that there might be something there. What if that's that? And now I'm about to walk into this shit. It's still pretty fucking intimidating whether you want to admit it or not. So, you just got to remember to keep your fucking head about you and not let yourself delve into the mind of madness, which a lot of people unfortunately do. And once you let yourself disbelieve the reality that's surrounding you, once you let your mind dictate what you're seeing, what you're understanding, hearing, feeling, etc., once the senses leave your body and you just go with the flow, you've got to remember to keep reason within your mind. Because if you don't, you're screwed. And that's really it.
Well, Tony, on behalf of Big Bucket Empire on YouTube and Facebook, K.O.E Nation on YouTube, TikTok, Twitch, and Twitter,
Yes.
and Hazard Analysis on YouTube.
Indeed.
Thank you for sharing some of your experiences with Grip and Grip Paranormal. Is there anything you'd like to say to the people?
Really, it's just, I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen, I've felt, I've heard a lot of great things. And I've been on location with people who have allegedly seen, felt, heard, etc. a lot of great things. The number one question I'm asked is, oh, do you believe in ghosts, or what's the best thing you've ever seen? And I never know how to answer that, because I don't know how to give an answer that's going to actually give them the answer that they want. Because I could sit here and bullshit all day and say, oh yeah, I saw a shadow person walk into a wall, or I had a ghost tug on the back of my fucking underwear, which those are things that have happened. How do you explain that though? How do you explain that and actually make it make sense? Without going, no, yeah, that's totally exactly what happened, without the actual possibility.
When it's not measurable.
Right, exactly.
It's always hard.
Measurable. You've got to understand the situation, and for me, it's overcoming. You've got to replace fear with curiosity, and that's always kind of been the mantra. Don't get freaked out, even if you're curious, because once the curiosity delves into fear, you're fucked. You've only got so many days on this realm. And if you want to spend a few of them trying to have a bigger, larger understanding of some of the other aspects of it, more power to you. And I encourage it. But just remember, your mind is your most powerful tool. Don't let it fool you, but don't let it betray you either.
Well, folks, as I'm known to say around here, all that being said, thank you for joining us for this very special interview discussion with Tony G of Grit Paranormal and the Revolutionary Wrestling Podcast, and Tony the Rod 2.0, or actually no, just Tony the Rod.
Tony the Rod.
On TikTok, folks. I just got so used to that 2.0 by now.
Me too.
But folks, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. I hope all of you make it back here to the Big Bucket Empire happy, healthy, much the wiser. God bless. Travel well. All right.